Nancy was the kind of person who, when she walked into a room, the atmosphere seemed to soften just a little. Her smile was gentle, sincere, and it made anyone around her feel welcome. I'd been working with Nancy at the hair salon for over 3 years, and during that time, she was the kind of colleague everyone loved, always ready to help, always listening, and with a kind heart that naturally drew people to her. But Nancy also had a weakness I had noticed early on. She trusted people too easily. She believed in things that didn't make sense to most, like spirits, signs from the universe, and messages from the beyond. And that very trust, I would soon realize, made her vulnerable. The story began one spring morning, with sunlight streaming through the salon windows, highlighting Nancy's hair in soft gold. She walked in, eyes sparkling, and immediately began telling me about a man she called her boyfriend. But this wasn't someone she'd ever met in person. He existed only through her phone. At first I thought it was just a fleeting crush, a new interest making her happy. But the way Nancy spoke about him made it clear. Her trust in this man was deep, genuine, and worryingly fragile. He texted me all night, Nancy said, a mix of excitement and nerves in her voice. He said he missed my laugh, even the silly things I've told him. It's strange, but it feels really nice. I smiled, not wanting to ruin her joy, but a sense of caution started to creep in. I'd heard too many stories about online romance scams, where loneliness and the need for attention were exploited. Nancy, with her trusting nature and her big heart, was exactly the kind of person who could fall prey. Nancy told me he lived in New York and was currently working on an offshore oil rig in Dubai every day. They texted and video called, sharing everything from work and hobbies to their deepest secrets. He tells me to keep certain things private, like he trusts me completely, Nancy said, her eyes bright, a mix of excitement and anxiety in her tone. What struck me as odd was that during the few times he visited the Midwest, Nancy had never introduced him to me or any of our other close colleagues. She always had excuses, busy with work, family obligations, or he's a little shy around strangers. I shrugged it off, trying not to judge, but inside I thought, she should at least meet him in person once, just to be sure he's real. In the beginning, everything seemed fine. Nancy was radiant with joy when she received early morning texts or video calls after work. She would gush about his warm voice, how attentive he was to every little detail in her life. I could see her coming alive, as if each message was a lifeline that lifted her out of the loneliness she carried around. But alongside all that, I began to notice warning signs, the extreme distance, constant promises without meeting, and the small emergencies he would create to test her reactions. It was like a subtle, sophisticated game where Nancy's emotions were being manipulated without her realizing it. I remember one afternoon, Nancy called me, her voice trembling. He says his mom is sick and he needs help. But I don't know what to do. I can only text him words of comfort. I looked into her eyes and saw the tension and confusion. Nancy was standing at a crossroads. Her rational mind told her to be cautious, but her heart urged her to help the man she trusted. A few days later, Nancy told me he had sent her a late-night message. My family is in a serious situation. I'm in Dubai and can't transfer money. Can you help me out? Reading the message, Nancy's hands shook, her eyes widened, and her heart raced. She felt fear, anxiety, but also an overwhelming desire to help. I froze for a moment, realizing this was the start of a journey that would challenge her, test her trust, and eventually teach her hard lessons about love and deception. From my perspective, the scene was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Beautiful because Nancy was filled with hope and affection. Heartbreaking because I knew that trust could be exploited. I started to understand that my role wasn't just as a co-worker anymore. I had to observe, be cautious, and warn her. The next day, Nancy told me about another crisis he faced on the rig, and she felt compelled to help. She asked if there was any way she could send him money. Alarm bells went off in my head. The amount he implied was huge, far beyond what Nancy could afford without risking serious debt. I tried to explain gently, "Nancy, I get wanting to help him, but this sounds risky. I'm worried this could be dangerous." Nancy didn't want to hear it. Her eyes were a mixture of pleading and complexity. Part of her wanted to listen to reason, but part of her wanted to follow her heart. I realized that warning her would be a huge challenge because her emotions were stronger than logic, especially when it came to the man she believed loved her. In the following days, Nancy told me about the small things he did to make her feel special. Thoughtful messages when she was tired, calls at odd hours but always knowing what she was doing, ways he seemed to understand her better than anyone else. I listened, and the danger became clearer. This was someone skilled at manipulating emotions, creating a private world where Nancy believed he was the only one who could understand her. The tension in Nancy's every word made me realize this wasn't just a simple online romance. This was a journey where she would face difficult decisions, emotional trials, and ultimately a lesson about trust, relationships, and self-protection. And from the moment Nancy received that first urgent message, the story of trust, friendship, loneliness, and the hidden dangers of online relationships began. This isn't just a story about love, it's a lesson about caution, about the signs we often ignore, and about protecting ourselves before it's too late. Nancy was the kind of person who, when she walked into a room, seemed to soften the atmosphere just a little. Her smile was gentle and sincere, and it made everyone around her feel welcome. I had worked with Nancy at the salon for over 3 years, and during that time, she was the colleague everyone adored, always ready to help, always listening, always kind. But Nancy had a vulnerability I'd noticed early on. She trusted people too easily. She believed in things most people would find strange, like spirits, messages from the universe, and signs from beyond. And it was that very trust, that willingness to see the good in everyone, that would soon make her dangerously susceptible. The story began one bright spring morning. Sunlight poured through the salon windows, glinting off the polished surfaces and catching the soft gold highlights in Nancy's hair. She walked in with a sparkle in her eyes, practically vibrating with excitement. She immediately began telling me about a man she called her boyfriend. But this was no ordinary boyfriend. Nancy had never met him in person. He existed entirely through text messages and video calls. At first, I thought it was just a new crush, a fleeting excitement that made her happy. But the way she spoke about him revealed a depth of trust and a fragility that worried me. "He texted me all night," Nancy said, her voice a mixture of excitement and nervous tension. "He said he missed my laugh, even the silly things I've told him. It feels strange, but really nice." I smiled, not wanting to ruin her joy, but a knot of unease began to form in my stomach. I had heard too many stories about online romance scams where loneliness and the desire for connection are exploited. Nancy, with her trusting nature and huge heart, was exactly the kind of person a manipulative scammer would target. She told me that he lived in New York but was currently working on an offshore oil rig in Dubai every day. They talked, texting and video calling for hours, sharing everything from work frustrations to hobbies, even the deepest secrets of their lives. He tells me to keep certain things private. Like he trusts me completely, Nancy said, her eyes wide with a mix of joy and anxiety. What struck me as a damned worrying was that during the few times he'd visited the Midwest, Nancy had never introduced him to me or to any of our close colleagues. She always had excuses. I was busy with work, he has family obligations, or he's just a little shy around strangers. I shrugged, trying not to judge, but inwardly I thought, she should meet him at least once in person. It would be the simplest way to know he's real. At first, everything seemed harmless. Nancy lit up whenever she received a message or video call. She gushed about his warmth, his attentiveness to every tiny detail in her life, and the way he seemed to understand her better than anyone else. She seemed alive, as if each notification was a lifeline pulling her out of loneliness. But alongside the joy, I began noticing small red flags, the extreme physical distance, the endless promises without ever meeting, and the tiny emergencies he conjured up to test her reactions. It was subtle, almost invisible to her, but I could see it. This was manipulation, calculated and emotionally clever. One afternoon, Nancy called me, voice trembling. He says his mom is sick and he needs help. But I don't know what to do. I can only send words of comfort. I looked at her and saw the tension etched in her features. Nancy was standing at a crossroads. Her rational mind urged caution, yet her heart demanded she help this man she trusted. A few days later, she received a late-night message. My family is in a serious situation. I'm in Dubai and can't transfer money. Can you help me? Nancy's hands shook, her eyes widened, and her heart raced. Fear and anxiety gripped her, but so did a desperate, overwhelming desire to help. I froze for a moment, realizing this was not just another text. It was the start of a journey that would challenge her, test her trust, and teach her hard lessons about love, deception, and loneliness. From my perspective, the scene was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Beautiful because Nancy was filled with hope and affection. Heartbreaking because I knew exactly how trust like that could be exploited. It was the moment when I understood my role had shifted from coworker and friend to someone who had to watch carefully, intervene if necessary, and protect her from mistakes that could cost her dearly. Over the following days, Nancy described more of the ways he made her feel special, the thoughtful messages, calls at odd hours timed perfectly to coincide with her schedule, and gestures that seemed to prove he understood her better than anyone else ever could. And with each story, I saw the danger more clearly. This was no ordinary romance. This was someone deliberately building a private world where Nancy believed she had a unique connection, leaving her emotionally isolated and fully dependent on him for validation. The tension in her words, the hope mixed with fear, made me realize that this wasn't just a story about love. It was about vulnerability, trust, and the hidden dangers of online relationships. And from that first urgent message, the tale of friendship, loneliness, hope, and deception began a story that would show both the beauty and the peril of trusting too deeply. That morning, Nancy walked into the salon with an unusual demeanor. Instead of her usual smile, her eyes reflected a deep worry mixed with a touch of anxiety. I noticed it immediately, but didn't want to ask too directly. Nancy was sensitive, and a blunt question could make her shut down emotionally as she sat down. Hands slightly trembling around her coffee cup, she opened her phone and stared at the screen. Finally, her voice quivered. "I got a message from him, and he needs me to help with a large amount of money. Urgently, I don't know what to do." A wave of concern hit me immediately, worry, caution, and a bit of frustration at Nancy's naive trust. I took a deep breath and chose my words carefully, not wanting to scare or upset her. "Nancy, listen to me. The amount he's asking for is huge, and you've never met him. This is a very clear warning sign." Nancy looked at me, eyes glistening with fear and hope at the same time. "But if his mum really is in trouble, I can't just stand by. He says I'm the only one he trusts. I can't ignore him." Just that sentence alone made my chest tighten. I understood her fear. The fear of being abandoned, the fear of losing the feeling of being loved. At the same time, I knew this was exactly what romance scammers exploit, placing their target between emotional obligation and blind trust. All day, Nancy was nearly unfocused. When cutting hair for clients, her hands shook, eyes constantly flicking to her phone. I tried to remain calm, observing her, and finding gentle ways to warn her. "Nancy, I sent you some articles about online romance scams. Read them again and see if anything matches your situation." She took the articles and skimmed through, replying only, "Yeah, I read them," without real engagement. I felt helpless. Her confusion and trust were too strong for a single rational warning to penetrate. By noon, Nancy pulled me aside, whispering, "I don't know what to do. He says his mum is facing a financial crisis and needs $10,000 immediately. He's in Dubai and can't transfer it right now." "I don't have that kind of money." I seized the moment, speaking gently. "Nancy, you need to understand one thing. In situations like this, the more you try to help without certainty, the greater the risk. If you send money, you or anyone you involve could be in serious trouble." Nancy turned away, face flushed, tears welling up. "You don't understand. I know him. He would never lie to me. I just want to help." I remained silent, not arguing. I realized that reason wouldn't win over her heart right now. Instead, I chose to be a silent companion, a shoulder for Nancy so she wouldn't feel alone. Over the next week, the tension escalated. Nancy began thinking about borrowing money from family or friends to help. Each time she mentioned it, I had to remind her, "Don't involve anyone else. If this is a scam, they'll lose money too." She nodded. But it was clear her desire to help was still strong. Nancy scrutinized every detail in the messages from her boyfriend. Every excuse for not meeting in person, every reason for delays, she believed completely. He said the rig sometimes doesn't have internet, and work is stressful. I understand. I realized that no warnings, articles, or advice could really sink in. She was too emotionally invested, too attached. I had to let her experience enough to see the pattern herself. But watching her pour her heart into someone who might not even exist was painful. Nancy began to oscillate constantly between hope and fear. Some messages made her heart sore. Others left her in tears. She would pace her bedroom, whispering, rehearsing what she might say, imagining his reactions. She even questioned herself. Am I overreacting? Is this real love or just wishful thinking? Every emotion was magnified through the lens of digital communication, where words and images could easily manipulate reality. Meanwhile, I remained her anchor. Whenever she called or texted in panic, I tried to ground her. I sent her stories of online romance scams and victims who had been deceived. Sometimes she read and nodded. Other times she shrugged it off. Those are extreme cases. He's different. Again, the heart was overpowering reason. One afternoon, Nancy confided that she felt isolated. I don't want to tell anyone else, she admitted, because they'll just say I'm stupid or paranoid. I want to help him. Her vulnerability was raw, almost unbearable to witness. I wanted to reach through the phone, hold her hand, and tell her she wasn't alone, but I couldn't decide for her. By the weekend, the pressure reached its peak. Nancy spent hours calculating how she might raise the money, what small sacrifices she could make, and how she could meet his urgent needs. I watched silently, warnings floating in the digital ether unheard, as the emotional storm within her continued to rage. And so, by the weekend, Nancy had fully immersed herself in this online relationship. Excitement, fear, hope, and desperation blended into a continuous, suffocating wave. Her world had narrowed to a single screen, a single man, and a single urgent request. The tension was unbearable, yet she could not step back. Her heart refused to let go. Little did Nancy know, this emotional whirlwind was exactly what would prepare her for the shocking revelations and life-changing lessons waiting just around the corner. That morning, Nancy walked into the salon with a distant, almost dazed look, as if the entire world around her had faded, leaving only the phone clutched tightly in her hands. I could see the weight of pressure pressing down on her, steps cautious, as if she were bracing against a storm only she could feel. I didn't ask too much to direct a question might push her further into her private world. She sat down, hands still trembling around her coffee cup, scrolling through the messages from the night before. Her voice quivered as she whispered, He messaged me. He needs me to help with money. Again. Even more than last time. I don't know what to do. A chill ran down my spine. This was the tipping point. If Nancy didn't stay alert, she would step even deeper into a trap where reason had little chance. I took a deep breath and spoke gently. Nancy, listen to me. This is a huge amount of money. You've never met him in person, and now he's asking again. This is very suspicious. Nancy looked at me, tears in her eyes, her voice trembling. But what if his mom really is in trouble? If I don't help, it would be my fault. He says I'm the only one he trusts. I can't just walk away, looking into those eyes. I realized her heart was already fully attached to a man she had never met. I knew reason would have little power over her feelings right now, but I still tried. Nancy, I understand you want to help, but you have to think about the risk. If this is a scam, you could lose money, credibility, and trust in others. She lowered her head, whispering, But I'm afraid if I don't help, he'll leave me. I'm scared of being alone. I knew this was a classic move of romance scammers, putting their victim between emotional obligation and reality. Every word hung heavy, but there was nothing I could do except watch her struggle internally. Over the next few days, Nancy became nearly unhinged with worry. When cutting hair, her hands shook, eyes constantly darting to her phone. She would repeatedly read the messages, whispering the words as if each line could save his family. I tried sending her more articles about online romance scams, but she would just nod or skim through them. Logic was overpowered by emotion. The tension peaked one evening when she texted me in panic. He says his mum could lose the house if there's no money. This time, it's $15,000. He says I'm the only hope. I feel so lost. I texted back, Nancy, stop for a moment. Think about yourself. You have no way of knowing what's real. This could be a well-planned trap. If you send money, not only you, but anyone you involve could be in danger. Nancy was silent for a long moment, as if chewing on every word I said. Her voice trembled as she replied, I know, but if I don't help, I'll feel guilty. I'll lose him. I understood she was trapped between imagined love and fear of loneliness. Every warning I gave made her anxious. Every imagined scenario of sending the money and saving his mum fueled a surge of hope in her heart. During this time, Nancy lived in a state of constant tension. She scrutinized every detail in his messages, excuses for not meeting, reasons for delays. She believed them completely. He says the rig sometimes doesn't have internet, and work is so stressful. I understand, she told me, her eyes bright but clouded. I knew I couldn't force her to see the truth. Reason couldn't win over her heart. I could only be her companion, a silent shoulder so she wouldn't feel alone in this emotional storm. Nancy began planning how to borrow money from multiple sources, figuring out ways to meet his urgent requests. Each time she mentioned involving someone else, I had to warn, Nancy, don't drag anyone else in. If this is a scam, they'll lose money too. She nodded, but her eyes still sparkled with determination and worry in the following days. Nancy lived in a whirlwind of emotions, hope, fear, anxiety, and anticipation. Every message from him was an emotional jolt, making her laugh or cry uncontrollably. She even began questioning herself. Am I overreacting? Is this real love or just wishful thinking? I remained her anchor. Whenever she called or texted in panic, I tried to bring her back to reality. I reminded her of true online romance scams and stories of people who lost everything. Sometimes she read and nodded. Sometimes she brushed it off. Those cases are extreme. He's different. Again, her heart overpowered reason. By the weekend, Nancy was almost mentally exhausted. She paced back and forth in her room, rehearsing what she might say, calculating ways to earn the money, imagining his reaction if she could send it. Her world had narrowed down to a single phone screen, a man far away, and a sum of money she had no guarantee she would ever get back. Nancy had no idea that this emotional whirlwind would lead her to shocking revelations, hard-earned life lessons about trust, loneliness, and deception. For now, all she knew was one thing: her heart would not allow her to step back. That morning, Nancy arrived at the salon with a pale face, her eyes deep and shadowed, carrying the weight of an entire world on her shoulders. She walked in, clutching her phone tightly, as if every vibration or message could decide the fate of his family. I could tell today was a critical day, the day she would face the choice between reason and heart. Sitting down, Nancy no longer smiled or chatted like usual. She just stared at her phone, scrolling through messages, and sighed, her voice trembling. He messaged again. This time, it's $20,000. I don't know what to do. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Nancy, I'm going to be honest. This is a serious warning. That's a huge amount of money, and you've never met him. If you send money, you or anyone you involve could lose everything. Nancy looked at me, eyes glowing with a mix of desperation and hope. But if I don't help, his mom will be in danger. He says I'm the only hope. I can't. I just can't walk away from him. I knew that at this moment, reason had almost no chance. Nancy was entirely driven by emotion, caught in a whirlpool of imagined love, loneliness, and obligation. I tried to reason with her gently. Nancy, there are ways to help without sending money. You could verify the information, contact family members, or wait until he's back. Don't let your emotions push you into a trap. She shook her head, tears welling up. You don't understand. I'm scared. If I don't do anything, he'll leave me. I'm afraid of being alone. Her words hit me like a knife. I understood that her loneliness and desperate need for love had created a dangerous spiral. Even knowing this might be a scam, I couldn't force her to face the truth. I could only stand beside her, a silent shoulder for her to cling to. All day, Nancy was in a state of extreme tension. While cutting hair, her hands shook, eyes constantly flicking to her phone. I watched her every move, gently reminding her, Nancy, don't involve anyone else. If this is a scam, they could lose money too. She nodded, but her eyes still held determination. That afternoon, Nancy pulled me aside, voice trembling. I'm thinking about borrowing money from friends, even family. But I don't want anyone to get hurt if this is a scam. I'm really scared. I held her hands and emphasized, Nancy, you are not alone. But you have to remember, emotions can make you blind. This is the moment to use reason to protect yourself. Nancy stayed silent, eyes glued to the screen. She scrolled through his messages, each word pouring hope, guilt, and fear into her heart. Every message felt like an emotional blow, making her both want to help and want to run away. That night, when everyone had gone home, Nancy texted me, I'm about to decide, I think. I'm going to send the money. I don't know where to get $20,000. My chest tightened. I knew that if she sent the money, it would be a dangerous move. But I also understood that forcing her could only make her withdraw. I texted back, Nancy, stop. Ask yourself, is this truly necessary or just pressure from a stranger? If you have any doubt, don't send it. She didn't reply immediately. I knew she was struggling inside, between the hope of helping his mum, the fear of being abandoned, and her own reason trying to protect her. This was the moment that could affect both her finances and emotional well-being. The following morning, she came to the salon, eyes red but calmer than the day before. I noticed a change. She began questioning the authenticity of the relationship, the repeated excuses for not meeting, and the money she had already sent, even hesitantly for the first time. Nancy started to doubt her long-distance boyfriend. The story had reached an emotional climax, with Nancy tense, fearful, and hopeful all at once. This was also the moment for me, as her friend and narrator, to balance warnings with companionship, helping her see the truth before it's too late. Nancy's decisions today would determine the turning point in her story. She could step back, or continue deeper into the trap, only to face the painful reality later. It was a lesson about trust, loneliness, and the dangers of manipulated emotions that anyone could encounter in the digital age. That morning, Nancy walked into the salon looking exhausted and tense. Her eyes were shadowed from sleepless nights, her hair falling loosely without its usual care. I could tell she had endured hours of mental turmoil the night before, thinking, questioning, fearing, and hoping all at once. As she sat down, she didn't speak a word. I gently asked, "Nancy, are you okay? Did you get any sleep?" She sighed, staring at her phone, her voice trembling. "I don't feel okay. His messages, they're making me so anxious. I'm starting to wonder, am I being scammed?" Hearing that, my heart tightened. Finally, a glimmer of reason was piercing through her mind. I softly said, "Nancy, it's normal to have doubts. Realizing the truth can be shocking, but it's the first step to protecting yourself." She lowered her head, voice shaky. "I've sent small amounts, $50, $100, $500, over 6 months, and I thought I was helping him. I've been taken advantage of. I feel so foolish." I placed my hand on her shoulder gently. "No, Nancy, you're not foolish. You trusted in love and sincerity. Anyone could fall for this, especially when lonely and craving affection. What matters now is that you can see the truth." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, a mix of shame and relief. "I'm scared. I don't know how to deal with the money I've sent. And the feeling of betrayal." I squeezed her hands, recognizing the truth is the first step toward regaining control. You can learn from this experience and gradually manage what you've sent. The important thing is that you're no longer being manipulated. Over the next few days, Nancy barely parted from her phone. She reviewed every detail, every old message, every excuse for not meeting. Each time she looked back, she noticed repeated patterns, illogical reasons, and promises that were never fulfilled. She started keeping a journal of her feelings and the money she had sent, realizing a familiar pattern. This was a classic romance scam. One quiet afternoon, Nancy sat down with me, I've realized. He never intended to meet me. Every reason, every promise. It was just to get me to send money. I don't know what to do. I calmly replied, "What you need now is to stay calm. First, stop sending any more money. Second, document every detail about the amounts you've sent, messages, emails. If you want, you can contact authorities or your bank to review the situation." Nancy nodded, tears falling. I'm angry, hurt, and regretful for trusting so much. But I also feel relieved. I finally see the truth. She began talking more with me about her emotions, loneliness, desire to be loved, and the psychological manipulation she'd endured. Her voice was trembling and weak with every story. But I noticed something important. Nancy was starting to free herself from the illusion. Even though the process was painful, a part of her still doubted and feared being abandoned. But reason had temporarily won over emotion. She began to understand that loneliness wasn't an excuse to risk money and blind trust. This was a major step in her journey, from being completely manipulated to starting to recognize the trap and actively protecting herself. In the following days, Nancy shared with me the details of every small amount she had sent, every story he told. She could finally see the pattern of a romance scam, where victims are manipulated through emotion, hope, and loneliness. I listened, comforted her, and reminded her that recognizing the truth was a victory, even if it came late and at a high cost by the end of the week. Nancy decided to cut off all contact with her long-distance boyfriend. She cried, feeling both pain and relief, but I knew that for the first time in 6 months, she had freed herself from the toxic emotional spiral. She told me, "I feel scared," and relieved. Scared because I lost something I thought was real. Relieved because I'm no longer being manipulated. Part 6 ends on a pivotal note. Nancy begins to think clearly and see the truth, preparing to face the consequences of the money she has already sent. This is an emotional climax: anger, fear, disappointment, and relief all at once, setting the stage for the next chapters where she learns to cope and rise after the shock. That day, Nancy arrived at the salon looking exhausted, her eyes red from crying throughout the night. I could tell that she was no longer just a deceived person, but someone now confronting the consequences of decisions made in the heat of emotion. Her gaze was filled with fear and regret, but also a spark of determination. She had to face the truth. She had to stand strong. She sat down, hands trembling around her water glass, her voice barely above a whisper. I've sent money, bit by bit, over the past 6 months. And now I finally realize it was all just a scam. I held her hands gently. Nancy, the important thing is that you've realized it. You can learn from this and recover. Think about your next steps. Stop sending money, document everything, and seek help if needed. Nancy sighed, her face showing utter exhaustion. I'm scared. Scared that others will find out. Scared of being judged. Scared that I really was foolish. But I also feel a relief. Finally, I'm not being deceived anymore. Over the next few days, Nancy began telling her story to a few close friends, including me. She shared every detail: how he contacted her, the promises he made, the small amounts of money she had sent, the way she was manipulated, and her own feelings of loneliness. Each time she recounted the story, her voice trembled, but her eyes shone brighter, as if each retelling was a step toward freedom. She said, "I don't know why I trusted so much. But when you're alone, when you're lonely and craving love, you do things you would never normally do." I nodded gently. Exactly, Nancy. Anyone could fall into this situation. It's not because you're foolish, it's because you are human, with emotions and a need to be loved and trusted. What matters now is that you see the truth and can protect yourself. Nancy began analyzing every detail of her old messages. She started noticing the repeated excuses for not meeting in person, the promises never fulfilled, and the classic pattern of a romance scam, exploiting emotions, placing the victim in a position where they feel compelled to act, and continually applying pressure to obtain money. One quiet afternoon, she confided in me. "I'm scared. Scared to face my family. Scared to tell anyone. But I know if I don't share, I'll carry this guilt forever." She decided to tell her sister and a few trusted colleagues. At first, their reactions were a mix of shock and concern. Some were upset, but most listened and comforted her. She realized that sharing her story not only relieved her emotionally, but also served as a warning to others. I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. I've learned a painful lesson. Nancy also started documenting every payment she had made, and every detail of their conversations, so that if necessary, she could involve the bank or authorities to investigate. She said, "I want to have control over what's left, even if it's too late. At least I can salvage something." Throughout this process, Nancy experienced a whirlwind of emotions: anger at herself, disappointment, fear, and relief all at once. But the key was that she was now thinking clearly, beginning to face the consequences and taking steps to recover. She looked at me, her voice trembling but resolute. I know I've lost some trust, but I've also learned that no one is worth sacrificing myself and my money blindly. I will be more careful, and I won't let this happen again. That evening closed with a feeling of both pain and liberation. Nancy still cried, still felt fear, but for the first time in months, she was standing on her own feet, knowing she was no longer entirely a victim, and beginning the journey to regain control over her life. That morning, Nancy walked into the salon looking both exhausted and determined. Gone was the vacant panic and fear that had filled her before. In its place was a clarity, even though the emotional weight of what she had gone through still lingered heavily. Her eyes were shadowed, her hair disheveled, but there was a sharpness in her gaze, as if she was finally ready to face the reality she had avoided for weeks. She sat down, her voice trembling but resolute. I've lost a significant amount of money, and now I have to face reality. I can no longer dream that he will come back or that everything will be okay. I looked at her and realized this was a crucial turning point. Nancy was finally accepting her loss and stepping into the stage of recovery. I gently reminded her, Nancy, you did the right thing by stopping any further payments. Now it's time to focus on protecting yourself and taking back control of your life. She sighed, tears streaming down her face, a mix of pain and relief. I'm angry, disappointed, and deeply sad. But I know that if I don't confront this, I'll live forever in manipulation and regret. Over the next few days, Nancy meticulously documented every dollar she had sent, noting dates, reasons, and the related messages. This process didn't just give her a sense of control, helped her see the full picture. She had been manipulated in subtle, calculated ways, piece by piece. Every entry in her journal became a testament to her growing awareness. Even though the price she paid was high, she also realized that the greatest loss wasn't just the money, it was trust. Trust in people, trust in love, and trust in her own judgment. Nancy admitted, I was so lonely, and I wanted to be loved so badly that I didn't see the warning signs. Now I'm scared that I'll lose trust in everyone. I reassured her. Nancy, losing trust is normal after a shock like this, but you can rebuild it gradually by learning from your experience, connecting with people you truly trust, and setting clear boundaries for yourself. Trust can be restored, but it takes time and caution. To relieve her mental burden, Nancy began sharing her story more widely, not just with close friends, but with a few colleagues at the salon. Reactions varied. Some were shocked, others concerned, but most listened with empathy and offered advice. She realized that she was not alone, and that sharing her story was a critical step in her recovery, helping her process emotions while warning others. Another major step was Nancy deciding to cut off all contact with the man, deleting all channels of communication and setting firm boundaries. She told me, I need to focus on myself, on my family, and on my work. I don't want to be manipulated or have my emotions override my judgment ever again. Alongside accepting her loss and cutting contact, Nancy began establishing a personal financial plan, saving diligently, tracking expenses, and learning to recognize online financial scams. She realized that the most important lesson wasn't the money she lost, but learning how to protect herself, recognize danger, and not let loneliness or emotions dictate her decisions. Every day, Nancy reminded herself, I will never let this happen again. I will be careful, aware, and maintain distance from anyone who approaches me only through emotions or money. Gradually, her emotional state stabilized. The sense of loss lingered, but she discovered a new strength, the strength of awareness, of standing up after a shock and beginning to rebuild trust. Nancy also joined online groups, reading about other people's experiences with romance scams and learning how they had recovered. She said, "Hearing others' stories makes me feel I'm not alone, and I learn how to spot warning signs." This process not only aided her recovery, but turned her painful experience into a lesson to warn others, giving value to her suffering. One evening, Nancy looked back through her journal, reviewing every detail of the money she sent, the fake messages, and the emotional manipulation. She whispered to herself, "I lost money, but I haven't lost trust in myself. I've learned to protect myself, and I will never make the same mistake again." By the end of the week, Nancy came to see me, her eyes calmer, her voice steady. "I know it will take time to forget everything, but I feel more confident. I will never let anyone manipulate my emotions or money again." Part 8 concludes at an expanded emotional climax. Nancy accepts her losses, confronts the consequences, learns to protect herself, shares her story to warn others, and begins the journey of restoring trust. This sets the stage for the final chapter, where she will draw life lessons, alert others, and reclaim confidence in herself and healthy relationships. That day, Nancy walked into the salon looking stronger than ever before. Her hair was still slightly messy, and her eyes were still red from crying, but her gaze was sharp, filled with determination, as if she were ready to face any reality. She was no longer the confused, fearful girl lost in illusions about a distant romance. Nancy was now fully aware, and in that awareness lay a determination to reclaim control over her life. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling yet resolute. "I've lost a lot, not just money, but also trust. But now I have to do something. I need to warn others." I realized this was the most important step from a passive victim. Nancy was now stepping into the role of storyteller and advocate, turning her painful experience into a source of strength and a lesson for the community. In the following days, Nancy began sharing her story with more people, not only close friends, but also colleagues, family members, and even on social media. She recounted every detail, how he contacted her, the unkept promises, the small sums of money she had sent, and the feelings of manipulation and loneliness she endured. Each time she told the story, her voice shook, yet her eyes grew brighter. People were shocked by the intricacy of the scam, some appalled at how clever the manipulation had been. But most listened empathetically, offered advice, and most importantly, acknowledged Nancy's courage and clarity. She said, "I want people to know that loneliness is never a reason to sacrifice yourself or your money. Anyone can be deceived if they are not careful. And I learned this the hard way." Nancy even created a detailed record of every payment, accompanied by messages and promises from her long-distance boyfriend, so that if necessary, she could present them to her family or authorities. This gave her a renewed sense of power and control, replacing the helplessness she had felt before. One afternoon, Nancy decided to post her story online as a warning. She began, "Be careful with online relationships. Not everyone who says they love you is sincere. Stay alert, and never send money without meeting the person or knowing them well." The response from the community was overwhelming. Many people messaged her, sharing their own stories, and some thanked her for her bravery in speaking out. Nancy said to me, "I'm not just saving myself anymore. I'm helping others. It feels relieving and meaningful in a way I never imagined." Nancy also started setting new boundaries in her personal relationships, learning to trust while remaining vigilant. She spent more time with family and friends, participated in social activities, and learned to evaluate people based on their actions, not just their words. She told me, "I've realized that true love never forces you to sacrifice yourself blindly. Trustworthy people will respect you and never exploit your emotions or finances." The emotional climax of Part 9 is Nancy being fully aware, self-assured, and proactive, no longer manipulated, turning her painful experience into strength, lessons, and a warning to the community. This sets the stage for Part 10, where she will restore her confidence, rebuild healthy relationships, and close her story with a powerful, uplifting message. After weeks of facing loss and emotional shock, Nancy entered the final stage of her recovery. She was no longer haunted by financial or emotional setbacks. Instead, she had developed a new confidence and clarity, along with a strong determination to rebuild her life. That morning, Nancy woke up with a completely different mindset. Fear and confusion were gone, replaced by determination and a clear sense of self-worth. She messaged me and a few close friends who had supported her throughout the ordeal. "I know I can't go back and change the past, but I can learn from it and do better in the future. Thank you for not letting me be alone." Nancy began focusing on her work, improving her skills as a hairstylist, and connecting more deeply with her clients. Each day she reminded herself that stability in her career and finances would help her rebuild trust and independence. She worked harder, cared more, and realized that taking control of her life was the best way to stand strong against any future challenges. Family became an essential emotional anchor. Nancy spent more time with her parents and sister. Warm evenings together, shared meals, and heartfelt conversations reminded her that true love and care are always around you, unlike the false promises of strangers. These moments comforted her and gave her strength, showing that trust and affection could exist, but only from those who genuinely care. Nancy not only learned to protect herself financially and emotionally, but also shared her story more broadly. She recounted her experience on social media, online forums, and to new acquaintances, describing how the scammer approached her, the small payments she made, the manipulations she endured, and the lessons she learned. Each story emphasized warning signs, how to recognize romance scams, and ways to protect oneself. The response from the community was overwhelming. Many people messaged her, shared their own experiences, and asked for advice. Nancy said to me, "I'm not just saving myself anymore, I'm helping others." This feels both relieving and meaningful. The connections she formed showed her that her painful experience could be turned into strength and valuable lessons for others. Another crucial step was Nancy learning to open her heart cautiously in personal relationships. She spent time with genuine friends, participated in social activities, and learned to evaluate people based on their actions, not just words. She said, "I've learned to trust, but not blindly. I can recognize who truly deserves my affection and care." Nancy also joined online communities, focused on preventing romance scams, sharing her experience, guiding others on recognizing warning signs, and protecting themselves. She explained, If I can help even one person avoid what I went through, then all the pain I endured is worth it. I want my story to be a warning lesson. During her recovery, Nancy realized her inner strength. She understood that being scammed did not define her. How she confronted it, learned, and rose above it did. Every day, she reminded herself, life will always have challenges, but I can stand strong, recognize danger, and love myself first. One afternoon, Nancy met me with bright eyes and a warm smile. I've learned more than just about losing money or being scammed. I've learned to love myself, to protect myself, and most importantly, to stand up after failure. I feel more confident and ready to embrace healthy relationships. The final emotional climax shows Nancy as her strongest self, aware, confident, and proactive. She turned her painful experience into strength, lessons, and a message for the community. She knew that scammers would always exist, but with awareness and knowledge, she could stand her ground and never be manipulated again. The story concludes with Nancy strong, confident, and hopeful for the future. She realized that trust can be rebuilt, that genuine love and care exist around her. But the most important lesson is to love and protect herself first. This sends a powerful message, not only to Nancy, but to everyone. Stay alert. Don't let loneliness or emotions guide you into scams, and transform challenges into inner strength. This expanded Part 10 provides a full emotional climax and satisfying closure, ideal for a 10 to 12 minute storytelling video, emphasizing caution, recovery, restored trust, and personal empowerment.